Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Lightning Talk. My name is Jessica Torres. I'm a product manager here at Nolte, and today's topic will be reasons why your projects fail and how to avoid them. So, the most important aspect of project management is delivering business value to a customer. And as a project manager, you must foster a project environment which focuses in identifying this business value and being able to deliver it. However, we sometimes experience failures in some projects because they didn't end on time, they were over budget, or they changed in scope over time. There are many reasons why a project can fail. And in this presentation, we're going to be focusing on 6 basic reasons, the most common ones. Now, before we get into it, these are some statistics that I found on my research that I would like to share because I think they're pretty interesting, and it shows that it is a very common issue for all companies, and we're not alone. So, a service published in Harvard Business Review found that the average IT project overran its budget by 27%. Moreover, at least 1 in 6 IT projects turns into a black swan with a cost overrun of 200% and a schedule overrun of 70%. So as you can see, this is very common that projects do overrun its budget, and not by a little, by a lot. So a PwC study also found that out of over 10,000 projects, just 2.5% were completed 100% successfully. So that's a very tiny portion of companies that were able to complete these projects successfully. So it's not something very easy to achieve because a lot of issues can come up during a project. Now, Wellington is this is the most popular project management survey that it's in the UK. And in their survey, they realized that only 22% of organizations use a PM software. So this is very low. And coincidentally, 55% of organizations don't have access to real-time KPIs. As a result of this, 50% of those respondents said that they spend 1 or more days to manually collate project reports. So that's a lot of time that they have to spend doing this task manually because they don't use a PM software. And it's still, in my opinion, it surprises me that still a lot of organizations don't really use PM software when it makes your life so much easier, and it helps you see things in real time and just be more organized. And the last one is also just another reason why projects fails. Is related to a lot of the points that I'm going to talk about today. So it's the rework. 80% of respondents in a Geneca survey said that they spend half their time on rework. And this mostly has to do because we don't define the goals or the requirements clearly from the beginning. So there's a lot of things that have to be reworked during the project, which causes the delays. Maybe the budget overruns as well, and this causes some of the projects to fail. All right, now let's get into the reasons. So on the left, you're gonna see some of the reasons why this happens, and on the right side, you're gonna see some of the solutions that we can utilize to minimize these from happening. So the first one I'm going to tackle is the lack of visibility. So this increases the risk of failure because if there's no visibility, then you can't really see what possible issues may arise in the project or are currently happening, which then prevents you from being able to take steps to prevent this from happening or just providing a good solution for these problems. Also, a lack of visibility for the leadership or management to see what the status of the project is currently. They're not in the day-to-day activities of the project, but they should be able to get a clear picture at any time by looking at the project documentation or the project space where everything is kept. Also, without this visibility, if a new team member joins the team, then they're going to have a hard time understanding the project. Now, there's also another aspect, which is the lack of visibility, not only within the project, but within the company that also affects projects, right? So for example, sometimes resources are shared between projects. Say a developer is working in 2 or 3 projects at the same time. So that sometimes can cause lack of visibility in terms of what that person is working on, if they're even working on your project today, etc. And it is important that we know exactly uh, what they're working on and if they're working on a project today, because this will help us set correct expectations with the client. Also, sometimes the PMs, we manage a lot of projects at the same time, and updating the documentation and keeping the tools up to date, it does fall a lot lower in our priorities sometimes, because we're rushing to try to get everything that we need to get done in a day. So that's another reason why sometimes that happens. And also the resource allocations. If the team is not very clear what everyone is working on at the moment, sometimes it can cause to just keep adding more work and having team members that are working overtime, and this just starts becoming an issue. So some of the solutions we can apply to this is have a centralized location to publish all the project information. In our case, in Nolte, we use Confluence. So also have projects well documented, because again, you can just get to that project space and be able to see everything related to the project in one location, and anyone can know the status of it at any time. Also, just creating a process for adding and creating tasks and documentation. Um, if it's We all know that we have to do the documentation, but if we don't know what the process for it is, who should own what, when it should be done, then that's when things start not getting done and it starts causing issues. Fostering a collaborative environment in which everyone can help with any task. All stakeholders should be kept up to date. For example, weekly reports, this could be daily or monthly, whatever is easiest, but all stakeholders should be included in every conversation, even if they're not going to be involved 100% on the project. In our case, we also use Jira at Nolte, so the board should always be up to date, because this is the easiest way to know if a project is on track or is behind. The resource management tool should always be up to date, and good communication is key. The second reason is unclear objectives. Now, at the bottom, you see there's a statistic from Jenica, which says only 50% of people involved in projects, team leaders and project managers, feel that the project's business objectives are clear to them. So, in my opinion, that is very low, because when you're starting a project, objectives should be the first thing you do. If you don't know the objectives of a project, how do you know what you're going to work on? How do you know what solutions you need to accomplish and what the client wants, right? So some of the reasons why this happens is you do not ask the right questions to the customer, not enough time spent discussing the requirements and main goals of the client. And sometimes it is better to just say to the client, listen, I need 1 or 2 more days, but I prefer to get this, to get a clear understanding of this, and make sure that the rest of the project goes smooth, and realizing in the middle of it that you don't know what the objectives are and having to do rework and then failing. Also, in terms of the company, if leadership management is not clear about the priorities, then how can you expect that the rest of the organization will be clear? And lack of prioritization make us overwork team members, because if you don't know what the priorities should be, then again, you might have to do some rework. So some of the solutions could be have a meeting at the beginning of the project with the client where you have previously written questions that will help you understand the goal of the project, the product, what you're working on. Also rank the project priorities and share this with the client to make sure you're focusing where you should be focusing. Also remind the team of the project objectives frequently and review these as well. If you set these objectives at the very beginning of the project and then don't review them until the end, there's a big risk that maybe you didn't achieve those. So by reviewing them constantly, you make sure that you are on track to achieve those objectives. And also set up metrics that will help you evaluate that you achieved this, because otherwise, how can you know exactly if you met the goal? Now, the third reason is poor communication. According to Atlassian, 59% of US workers say communication is their team's biggest obstacle to success, followed by accountability. And I agree with this. There's communication in general in our everyday life is challenging, and more so in projects. So there's a lot of reasons why this can happen. For example, we do receive a lot of emails every day, and sometimes it is hard to keep up with all of them, and some important details may be missed. Also language barriers. So a lot of us, nowadays in the world, some people work remote. We have clients from different countries that speak different languages. So if, say, English is not your first language, some things might get misunderstood or lost in translation. Also, assumptions are made sometimes, and you should never make assumptions. You should always confirm things. Not using the appropriate method. So sometimes we might think that it's good to email about a specific issue, and it may require a lot of back and forth, but that might not be the best way. Maybe the best way is to just get on a call or in a face-to-face meeting. So being able to realize what the best method is for any time. Not listening to your team, being close-minded, and fear of saying no, which sometimes some people can have the fear of saying no to team members, clients, and by that they try to, when they try to say no in an email, they try to embellish it or just put pretty words around it that may cause the message to not be clear to the person. So some of the solutions are create a communications plan in which you say what is going to be communicated, when, who's going to own that, the method that you're going to use to communicate that, and that way you have set expectations early on. Also, status reports, whether they're daily, weekly, monthly, it's a good way to keep the communication going. For emails, you can just easily label them and put in the subject the word important in all caps, and that way the person knows, okay, we need to look at this email right now and it is very important, so let's read it very carefully. Also, double check to make sure you understand all your questions and the answers. Again, a centralized location for important communication. Stay open to your team's suggestions and opinions, and be very, very clear when something cannot be done or you're having issues. Now, the fourth one is probably the one we're all more familiar with, and it's the most common one. So at the bottom, you'll see this is a survey that Wellington did, and it's a question where they ask how often is the scoping document created as part of the planning stage, and only 59% said always or most of the time, which again, this seems very, very low to me, because if you do not have a scoping document, how can you get the approval from the client? How do you know exactly what you're going to work on? So some of the reasons why this might happen is not having a scoping document, not getting approval from the client on that scoping document, saying yes to everything the client requests, not clearly documenting scope changes, no risk management, project complexity, because there's more likely there's going to be scope creep in a project that is 6 months, 1 year long than one that is only 1 month long. And also lack of clarity in the goals and the requirements. So on the right side, you see the triangle. This is something that we're all probably very familiar with, and if not, we should be, and we should be keeping this in mind every day. This triangle has cost in one side, scope in the other, and time in the other. And basically, it's just a good way to see if, say, the client requests that they want to increase the scope of the project. Well, you can't increase the scope of the project without also increasing the cost and the time. Or if they say, I need to reduce the cost, okay, that's fine, but there's gonna be a reduction of the scope, right? So it's just something very important that will allow you to handle the communications with the clients better, and just handle projects in general better. So to get into the solutions, so having a clearly defined project scope from the beginning and having the client approve that is very important. Also, just establishing a change requirement process and clearly documenting and keeping track of all those change requirements, because some of them might not get done at the moment. They just need to go in the backlog. Some of them do. Just making sure the client understands the process, and that trade-off is very important, because that will also decrease the chances of any misunderstandings in the future or any discussions. Do not be afraid to say no if something cannot be done or it's going to cost extra. And establish a risk management process from the planning phase. So from the very beginning, you should establish a risk management. You should identify all the risk that can help your project to fail. because if that happens, then you already have thought about it and you have a plan in place for it. Now, the fifth one is unrealistic deadlines. Setting tight deadlines causes unnecessary stress on your team. It also causes the team to rush to get their work done, and then quality is not up to the standard. A lot of bugs and errors come up. There's some of the reasons why it happens is because maybe you didn't build enough wiggle room into the estimates. Also, not all team members are consulted on the deadline before sharing with the client. No historical data or optimism. So how can you tackle this? Well, again, from the beginning, you need to identify the possible factors that could play a role in delaying your project. Also, when you have an estimate, you should build some buffer into it. So say a developer says, oh, this feature is going to take me 1 day to build. You shouldn't just say, okay, that's 1 day. You need to add some time for QA, testing, possible bugs that may come up, and then possible complications. So you could say, okay, well, that's going to take 1.5 days to get done. Then you also should get all the team members' opinions on the deadlines before sharing with the clients, because sometimes you may not be aware of other projects they're working on, if they're off. So by getting basically a pre-approval from the internal team that everything looks good, that's our commitment, and then you can share it with the client and make sure, okay, this will get done by this day. Start tracking internal data to be able to make better decisions based on this. So for example, if you could track how many story points a developer can work on a specific week, or how many bugs they create on average for every project, that will allow you to, in the future, be able to make better decisions and say, okay, with this developer, we can get 20 user story points in 1 week, but with this one, we can only get 12 because they create more bugs or they work slower, etc. These will definitely allow you to make better decisions. And lastly, be realistic. I know we all want to say, yes, we're going to finish this on time, but you got to be realistic. The sixth and last one is lack of trust. So according to Atlassian, 78% of US workers don't fully trust their teammates, which is a very high number, right? Because if you're working with a team and you want to make sure it all goes right, you should be able to trust them. So sometimes this can happen. For example, if a team member did not deliver on a previous project or projects. Also micromanagement. Some leaders have this, and what you're saying to your teammates when you're micromanaging is basically that you do not trust them. Also not open to listening or trying other solutions. It's another way of saying I don't trust you because, and I won't try any of what you will say. Not delegating also sends that message of lack of trust. More pressure does not mean better results. This is because sometimes there's that lack of trust. We're thinking, okay, we need to pressure more on that person or this team. And sometimes a lot of times, that's not the best approach because it just turns into everyone getting frustrated because of the pressure. So you should give them their space. And also only focusing on the negative reduces the confidence on the team. So some of the solutions for this is reassure your team member that did not deliver previously, that you're going to work together. This is a clean slate, and you're going to make sure that this new project will turn out great. Leaders also need to create a safe place where people feel comfortable sharing and trying new ideas, because also if you work in a place where you feel like you're sharing solutions, new points of view, and no one's listening or willing to try what you're saying, they're not giving you the chance. Not only you lose confidence in yourself, but you feel like you're not being here, and that starts to frustrate you, which then you stop sharing this with your teammates. Let the team be independent and just ask for a status. Trust they will ask for help if needed. So I guess this is more related to management or leadership in a company. Since they're not involved in the day-to-day activities of a project, you should let your team be independent. You should trust that they were going to ask for help if they need it, right? Even if things are going wrong, you should let them, you can ask what's happening, give me a status, that's it. But you should let them try to resolve it on their own, because by you saying it should be done this way, or asking how is this going to be done and why, and asking many questions, you're putting more pressure than is necessary, and you're also transmitting that feeling that you don't trust them to come up with a solution themselves. Some other solutions are to give people opportunities to prove themselves, recognize the good work, not just the bad work. This is just another way to keep your team motivated. And listen to your team, communicate, and delegate if you have too much work. Now, in conclusion, some of the things that you can do to make sure projects don't fail, it's to provide visibility of the project to everyone, define clear objectives and focus on the customer needs, create a communication plan, handle risk management, set realistic deadlines, trust your teammates, invest in project management training, which I found in my research that the companies that invest in project management training tend to be more successful and have better results in projects than companies that do not. And also, project managers can easily reduce the risk of failure by identifying common reasons that pave the way for project failure and taking steps to prevent this. So as project managers, as I said, we all probably manage a lot of projects at the same time. And in general, we have managed a lot of projects in our life. And every single one of them has given us a learning lesson, whether it's good or bad. And that should help us see signs of when something can go wrong and take the steps to prevent that. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the talk. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll answer later. And we will see you in next week's Lightning Talk. Thank you.